This is the irony of letting children like Greta Thunberg take up shelf space in your brain. Oh, maybe she'll drop solar panels down into Kyiv to save people. It's not going to happen.
Imagine being a full-grown adult and having that ridiculous take in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But unfortunately, Greg Gutfeld isn't the only moron who has that take on the right wing. They've decided to blame the war on a minor who's calling for the appropriate response to a very real climate emergency. Now, since this is an ongoing talking point among the right wing, I think it only makes sense that we take a trip to the debunker.
You didn't see Republicans, when we had control of the Senate, try to rig the game.
Shows how the Green New Deal would be a deadly deal for the United States of America.
Our systems are not racist.
All right, folks, welcome to the debunker. Before we really delve into the topic at hand, it's important to understand what this ridiculous talking point is. So why don't we hear from Greg Gutfeld with more context?
I have been waiting for this segment for days. This is the irony of letting children like Greta Thunberg take up shelf space in your brain. Think about all the adults that took her opinion over the progress made in fracking or drilling or the necessity of coal in nearly every country. But no. How dare you? Remember that? Yeah. How dare you? We all sat there. Oh, maybe she'll drop solar panels down into Kyiv to save people. It's not going to happen. China and Russia must have been laughing at us when we were allowed to be lectured on world affairs by a 14-year-old. Oil is a world affair. Energy is a world affair. Fuel is a world affair. We got to wake up to that. We also got to get back into the nuclear world. The anti-nuke ideology put us in a hole for many decades. It's probably the greenest fuel that we will ever see.
Imagine waiting for days to be able to attack Greta Thunberg. Like that was the exciting moment that Greg Gutfeld was able to carry out. And there's a lot of nonsense about how, oh my God, we've been put in such a vulnerable position as a result of our energy dependence on Russia, which is complete and utter horse crap. And I'll explain why with the receipts in just a moment, but Cenk has a brief comment first.
Okay, so he said, I've been waiting for days to talk about this. Can you believe letting her take up shelf space in your brain?
It's amazing.
So you've been waiting days and thinking, I can't wait to attack that 14-year-old. Okay, that was hilarious. And then he's like, oh, she's just a kid. Yes, but she's a kid that agrees with 99% of the world's scientists. You see that sleight of hand? Instead of saying, hey, we're the morons who don't agree with scientists. Oh, it's a 14-year-old, can't be right. Now, speaking of morons and easy talking points, he says, what are you gonna do, drop solar panels into Kyiv? What are you gonna do, drop the Keystone Pipeline into the middle of Kyiv?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just a nonsensical talking point, but for Fox News audience, they're like, oh yeah, you can't drop the solar panels on them, that won't help, right? They love that. I didn't think through, how am I gonna drop an oil well in the middle of Ukraine either?
You know what's amazing is when I was at the Munich Security Conference, the conversations that I did have with European officials from various countries did touch on the energy dependence that they have, when it comes to Russia. And they were actually pretty upset with themselves for not moving further along with the development of renewable energy, because that is what would make them less dependent on Russia. 40% of the energy that the European Union depends on did in fact come from Russia, right? And so if you relied on solar, wind, and look, I'm willing to have a conversation about nuclear. I know that people love to go nuclear about nuclear power. I'm not ready to have that conversation yet. It's something that I'm still reading into, but there are some good points in regard to using nuclear power to kind of close that gap as we develop more renewable energy. But with that said, the United States is not in any way vulnerable because of our dependence on Russian energy. So let me give you the details on that. Here are the receipts. Last month, for the first time ever, the United States or US exports of liquefied natural gas to Europe actually exceeded Russia's pipeline deliveries. As the domestic oil and gas industry continues to rebound from the spring 2020 price collapse caused by the onset of COVID, the United States is again the world's top oil producer, almost 20% above the other two largest producers, Saudi Arabia and Russia, and the world's top natural gas producer. So let me repeat that again for people who might have people like Greg Gutfeld who have a difficult time comprehending what the reality is. The United States is the top oil and natural gas producer. And it's hilarious to me that they present their arguments as if the climate scientists have won, as if Greta Thunberg and other climate activists have won. They haven't even come close to winning. The United States is still drilling, is still fracking, is still very reliant on fossil fuels. There's no question about it. To pretend as if it's otherwise is ridiculous, okay? But let me give you more. In 2020, the US exported more oil than it imported for the first time ever, according to the US Energy Information Administration's February 2021 short-term energy outlook. How much of our oil comes from Russia? Right, because we're so dependent on Russia. That's what's made us so vulnerable, according to Greg Gutfeld and the other idiots who regurgitate those talking points. As of late 2021, the United States was importing 8.5 million barrels per day of crude oil from all countries. Canada was our top supplier, sending the United States 4.5 million barrels per day. Mexico was second. And then Russia at 595,000 barrels per day. Saudi Arabia was our fourth largest supplier at 555,000 barrels per day. Thus, Russia supplied only 7% of US crude oil imports in late 2021. And look, I wanna be clear about one other thing. The way this whole system works is super weird, right? Because on one hand, we're the top oil producing country, the top natural gas producing country. And then we keep exporting the fossil fuels and then talking about like, oh, what can we do? All the OPEC plus countries like Russia, like Saudi Arabia, were withholding production specifically to ensure a spike in fuel prices because they wanted to profit as much as humanly possible. I mean, the whole system is sick. It'd be much better if we were reliant on renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuels. So despite what they're saying, moving toward more fracking, more drilling, more fossil fuels actually does more harm than good in the future.
Yeah, well, that's what you say. But you know what? I just dropped a gas pump right onto your facts. What are you gonna do now, huh? Gotcha.
Man, I don't know. I ran out of my, my solar panels and my
so you couldn't block it. You see that? You see that? So the solar panels didn't help her at all. Okay, no, guys. One more thing that's a giant misnomer that nobody ever clarifies. It's not our oil as in US oil. Private corporations own the oil.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Right. And so they like, hey, if I'm going to make more money selling to Germany, then I'll sell to Germany instead of Albuquerque, right? And there's nothing you could do to stop them, and nor would the American government be inclined to stop them. And so, for example, when we go to Iraq and people think, well, and Trump literally said it, like, why don't we just take their oil, right? But we wouldn't be taking their oil, and we're not going to Iraq to get their oil. We're going to Iraq so that ExxonMobil can get their oil. That's what makes it honestly even sicker, right? Because our government is not run by the people, it's run by giant corporations, and oil companies are among the biggest of those corporations, and they literally give legalized bribes to our politicians. So, and also the huge advertisers for stations like Fox News, and so the entire right-wing infrastructure has been built around doing propaganda on behalf of corporations.
Exactly, that's all they're doing. That's all they're doing. And then you have right-wing voters who just regurgitate their talking points, not understanding that, in this new populist wave of republicanism, they're just spouting pro-corporate talking points.
100%. They're like,
big oil.
Yeah, they're like, oh no, man, I don't like big business. They're in bed with big government. It's all about corruption. That's why, I support ExxonMobil. Wait, what? ExxonMobil is one of the largest corporations. We got to drill for more oil so Exxon can make more money. They don't say Exxon. They don't realize that the whole reason Greg Gutfeld's telling them that is that Exxon will make an extra couple of $1 billion. But they're like, oh, more oil. Who? You're getting the oil? You're not getting the oil. Exxon's making the profit from that oil. You don't get it. By the way, the good news is when the solar energy and the wind energy companies become larger than the oil companies, then you'll see Fox News hosts filleting them. They're like, hey man, your solar panels. You got to do the solar panels. Why? Because then they're getting paid by them. That's the way this system works.
Yeah, it is the way the system works. Now, I also want to go to the issue of land leases because that's the other right-wing talking point, right? It's like, oh, our big oil sponsors really want to use more land leases to drill for additional oil. And what's the reality on that particular issue? Well, believe it or not, Jen Psaki had a great response to that allegation. So why don't we go to that video and then I'll go into more detail.
But some of the accomplishments that President Biden might point to are now seen by a majority of people in the country to be vulnerabilities, one on the energy front in particular. Will there be anything in the speech to talk about reversing some of those policies, for example, either Keystone Pipeline or allowing our oil and gas companies to pursue federal oil and gas leases, even while we try to transition in the future with a smart path to greener energy?
Well, I would say, Dana, the president shares the concern about any impact on gas prices, on energy prices for the American people. And that's why a range of options remain on the table. He already recently tapped into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve just last fall, which had an impact. But I would say the Keystone Pipeline.
But the impact, Jen, that was a blip. It was a 10-cent thing, but it doesn't last.
But Dana, the policies you mentioned, I know Senator Cotton and others have mentioned these. They are not policies that would address the issue at all. This Keystone Pipeline, it would take years for that to have an impact on prices. Obviously, there are a range of reasons why the president opposes it, but it isn't functioning. It would take years. There are also 9,000 approved oil leases that oil companies are not tapping into.
I think she actually handled that really well. And just to buttress her point about land leases, here are the details. Let's go to graphic 3 here. While the industry's fear-mongering would seem to suggest that they are running out of leased lands on which to produce, more than half of all acres currently leased, 13.9 million acres in total, are not yet being used to produce oil or gas. By sitting idle on these leases, the industry is not creating any revenue or jobs, energy or otherwise. It is, however, making a sizable parcel of public lands unavailable for other valuable uses, such as recreation and conservation, at the taxpayer's loss.
Yeah.
That's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I'm just topsy-turvy world here as we give Jen Psaki and Joe Biden credit on the same show.
Credit when credit is due.
100%.
Right?
So, okay, last thing here, Jesse Waters in that same Greg Gutfeld segment talking about like, the solar's not gonna help anyway, it's gonna take years to develop. As Psaki pointed out, so is the Keystone Pipeline. It's not like you can say, oh, turn on pipeline. And then all of a sudden you have oil. No, it takes just as long, if not longer, because they have to build a whole pipeline. And they could drill right now, and that would take some time for that to work. But they're not even doing it, as Anna just pointed out. So almost everything you hear on Fox News is a lie. Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat, emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.